The town of Millbrook had always been afraid of the Iron Ravens. When their motorcycles rumbled down Main Street, shopkeepers locked their doors, mothers pulled their children close, and even the local sheriff would suddenly find urgent business elsewhere. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of small moments to change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories. Also, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The Iron Ravens were not the kind of men you looked at twice, and their leader, Marcus Stone Calloway, was not the kind of man you looked at all. He was 6 feet 4 inches of weathered leather and hard silence, with a jaw like carved granite and eyes the color of a winter storm. His hands had seen fights. His back had carried burdens most men would collapse under. And his heart, well, most people assumed he didn't have one. They were wrong. Marcus had a heart. It was simply buried under years of loss, under the weight of a childhood spent in foster homes, under the memory of a mother who had cried every night behind closed doors, while a man with heavy fists ruled their small apartment. He had grown up knowing what suffering looked like when it tried to hide itself. He had learned to recognize the careful way someone moves when they are protecting a wound. He had learned it as a boy, and he had never forgotten it. On a Tuesday morning in early October, the Iron Ravens stopped at Millie's diner for breakfast, the way they sometimes did when they passed through town on their annual ride. The diner went quiet the moment they walked in, booths full of locals, suddenly becoming very interested in their coffee cups. Marcus didn't notice or didn't care. He slid into the corner booth, his men filling the seats around him, and he picked up the laminated menu without a word. The waitress who came to their table was named Sarah. She was perhaps 28, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and a smile that she wore the way some people wear a uniform because the job required it, not because it came naturally that morning. Marcus looked up from the menu to tell her his order, and that was when he saw it. The foundation on her left forearm had been applied carefully, but not carefully enough. Beneath the makeup, just below the edge of her sleeve, were the unmistakable yellow-green edges of a bruise that was several days old. His eyes moved slowly and without drama to her left cheekbone, where the light from the window caught a faint swelling that no amount of concealer could completely hide. He said nothing. He ordered his eggs and black coffee in his usual quiet voice, and Sarah wrote it down with a hand that trembled, just slightly before she caught herself and steadied it. Marcus ate his breakfast in silence while his men laughed and talked around him. But his eyes, when they weren't on his plate, were watching the diner. He noticed how Sarah flinched when the cook dropped a metal tray in the kitchen. He noticed how she kept her left side slightly turned away from customers. He noticed how she glanced at the clock, every few minutes with an anxiety she was trying very hard to conceal. He noticed all of it because he had lived all of it, in a different body, in a different time. As a small boy who had learned that the most dangerous thing in the world was sometimes the person who was supposed to love you. When Sarah brought the check, Marcus took it, studied it for a moment, and then looked up at her directly for the first time. His storm-gray eyes met hers and he said, very quietly so only she could hear, "You don't have to explain anything to me, but you deserve better than this." Sarah's practiced smile faltered. Her eyes filled instantly, the way eyes do when someone finally says the thing you have been desperate to hear but terrified to ask for. She blinked rapidly and looked down at her order pad. Marcus slid the check back across the table with $500 in cash tucked beneath it, every bill he had in his wallet that morning. "For a start," he said simply. Then he stood, put on his jacket, and walked to the counter where Millie herself, the 70-year-old owner, was watching everything with sharp, knowing eyes. He leaned down and spoke to her for 3 minutes. Nobody in the diner could hear what he said, but they watched Millie's expression move from wariness to surprise to something that looked remarkably like gratitude. She nodded several times and pressed her wrinkled hand over his large one briefly. What Marcus had told Millie was this: he had contacts, legitimate ones, built over years of the Ravens, doing community work that never made headlines at a women's shelter 2 towns over. He had told her the name and the number. He had told her that if Sarah needed a safe place to go, the shelter had been supported quietly by the Iron Ravens for 6 years, and they would take her in immediately and help her get back on her feet. He had told Millie to please make sure Sarah knew she was not alone. The Iron Ravens rode out of Millbrook 20 minutes later, engines growling, the sound fading like distant thunder. By that afternoon, the whole town was talking. Word travels fast in small places. And what Marcus had done, the cash, the quiet words, the shelter connection, had been witnessed by 14 people in that diner. And those 14 people told everyone they knew. Sheriff Dale Patterson, who had always given the Iron Ravens a wide berth, made a phone call that evening to a number he had to look up twice because he wasn't sure. He was reading it right. Marcus answered on the third ring. The sheriff cleared his throat and said, "I owe you and your people an apology, Mr. Calloway, and a thanks." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Just make sure she's safe," he said. "That's all." Sarah left her husband that same week. Millie gave her extra shifts and let her stay in the apartment, above the diner while she found her footing. The shelter Marcus had recommended sent a counselor to meet with her. Slowly, with the help of people who had been moved by one man's quiet act of grace, Sarah began to rebuild. She still works at Millie's diner. She smiles differently.
No, not the practiced.
Careful smile of someone enduring. But the real kind, the kind that reaches the eyes. And in Millbrook something shifted. The town that had feared the Iron Ravens began to see them differently, began to understand that strength without compassion is just noise. But strength guided by a tender heart can change a life, can change a town, can change everything. Marcus never came back to Millbrook, but his memory did, in the form of a small frame note that Millie put up beside the register. It reads, "Sometimes the most unexpected people carry the most extraordinary kindness. True strength is not in how hard you can hit the world. It is in how gently you can hold someone who is breaking." If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories, a channel built on the belief that goodness exists everywhere, often in the places we least expect it. Every story we share is a reminder that one act of compassion can ripple outward and change the world. Join our family, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and never stop believing in the power of human kindness.